G'day everyone, David LeMire here with Martin Shaw. Welcome. I imagine that people are just jumping in and joining as I speak, so we'll give a little bit of a preamble before we jump into it, and just give people a chance to join online and get bottles open and glasses ready if they're not already. And charged with some wine, hopefully, and do let us know what you've got in your glass if you've got something. Hopefully, a Shaw and Smith, whether it be a young one or a mature one. And we've got about 7 wines that we're going to be tasting through this afternoon's session. So, yeah, it's really good to be here. Welcome, Martin.
Thank you, David. Good to be here. Welcome, everybody. Nice to not see you, and it does still feel a little daunting looking at a screen, not knowing if anyone is listening or watching or anything. But we can only hope.
That's right.
Just talking to ourselves.
That's right. It must be like the people doing the weather, where they've got talking to a blank screen. But we have wine, so that's good. So I might just start by giving you a few news updates before we get into the wines, and because it's been a bit happening since we last caught up and talked, be it online or in person. We haven't been idle, and particularly for those of you who've been up here to the winery in the last few months, you'll see that there are some building works going on. So, Martin, do you want to just give us an update on what's happening?
Yes, look, we seem to have outgrown the tasting room. That's point one. So we're essentially doubling the size of the tasting room, adding some more back of house stuff. We're also adding on the winery front another 2 bays to the winery, which will give us more open fermentation red area, and they will be filled with lovely French oak foudre, or big French oak 6.5 ton vats, which we'll use for fermentation of reds and also aging of reds. So the boys will be excited when that comes on board. And
definitely,
for those of you who happen to be local, it's been a bit wet underfoot here, so we have been held up a little bit, but we're still hopeful that things will be done by about Christmas.
Yes, it's no surprise. I guess it's hard to get things built on time, but it has been so wet. So
yeah, and look, the other thing is, our tasting room here has been terrific for the best part of 20 years, but it's time for a bit of a facelift. So the whole thing, the existing gets a good facelift, and the new is new, and hopefully that it'll be an exciting new experience for people.
And they're also not underway yet, but we're planning to do some work down in Tasmania.
Exactly. Yes, we're just releasing the 10th vintage. We've done the 11th, but the 10th is released. So we didn't want to rush into it, but we've now decided that we will break dirt and build a tasting room down on the vineyard at Tolpuddle. And plans are done. Plans are in council, and we're pretty excited by the look of those. And again, the target is for that to be finished by about Christmas 23.
Yeah. So
it'll be small. It'll be exclusive, bookings only. But I think it'll be good.
Yeah, it'll be really nice, because people do want to go and check it out, and at the moment it's more a case of driving past, but it'll be nice to be able to welcome people in and have something which is pretty well amongst the vines too.
No doubt, yeah. And that whole region, from a wine tourism perspective, is starting to kick. So I think the timing will be good.
And closer to home, we've been working at Piccadilly Vineyard, which we started planting 2 years ago, I think, at Piccadilly, and that's a really interesting project, very close planted, so the vine density is very tight, and that's coming along.
Coming along beautifully, and tight is right, David. It's for those of you who are experienced with Adelaide Hills planting, which tends to be closer than traditional Australian plantings, most of those vineyards would be in the order of 3,000 to 4,000 vines per hectare. Our Piccadilly vineyard is 10,500 vines per hectare. So it's tight rows at 1.25 metres and 0.75 between vines. So the idea is very much about producing less fruit per vine and taxing the vines less and aiming for concentration and balance and tannin and a bit of a leap of faith, but a well-researched and pretty exciting project.
Yeah, absolutely. It's in a brilliant position as well in Piccadilly.
Fantastic site, and we will pick the first fruit off that in 23. So everyone's pretty excited to see how that performs. They will be young vines, but we'll get a good indication.
And not so young vines, we have purchased a vineyard in Blewett Springs in McLaren Vale, or Upper McLaren Vale, which is a separate entity with its own identity. Mad Vineyard.
Yeah, and I think it's Mad is interesting. David can talk to the ideas behind it, but from my perspective, Michael and I have always been keen to do something with David LeMire and Adam Wadowitz, and they've been keen to do something with us. So this was an opportunity where it's not a Shaw and Smith venture, it's the four of us, and MAD is the initials of the four partners, Martin, Michael, Adam and David, and four equal shareholders. So it's you talk to the site, the wines, because they're just being released now.
Yeah. It's been, well, we've been living with it for a long time, and it's been really exciting. But we've been looking around there and excited by Blewett Springs, and particularly Grenache, and the potential of that for quite a while. And I was chair of the McLaren Vale Wine Show for 4 years, and judged 2 or 3 years prior to that. So I've got a bit of history down there. Adam is from the region as well. And just from that experience and seeing, in the wine show, you see these lineups of wines, and you'll have 30 Shirazes and 30 Grenache, and the most kind of perfumed and fresh and aromatic ones would come up, and you go, gee, where's that from? Oh, it's from Blewett Springs. And that really, I guess, crystallised my views about this place being really special. There's quite a bit of sand up there in Blewett Springs, and that, when you get a site that's got the sand on the top and then some ironstone underneath, you're getting beautiful aromatics, but also some really good structure. So
it's also elevated relative to McLaren Vale per se.
Exactly, yeah. So it's a couple 100 metres of elevation, some really old vines. So Grenache that was planted in 39. I was also really interested in Chenin Blanc, which is there because it also has this great inherent quality, which and the wine is really exciting that we've been able to make out of that. And it's got some Shiraz that where the plantings date back to 1941. So this old vine layers of concentration and texture are fascinating to work with.
And keep your eye out for the Mad wines, and they're being released this August 15th.
Yep, absolutely.
So, Shaw and Smith, we've got 2 wines to start off with, the 22 Sauvignon and 22 Riesling.
Yeah, so both new releases, obviously being from 22, and we're feeling pretty lucky that we had really tiny vintages in 19 and 20. We had a more bountiful vintage in 21, and 22 was not bountiful. It was okay, a little bit on the small side in terms of crops, particularly for Pinot, but the quality was terrific again, and a relatively cool year. But it did warm up a bit toward the end. It was a later year because it was cool early.
We also had some intermittent rain. It's all relative for many of you East Coasters. We haven't had any rain at all, but we had showers dotted throughout the growing season, which helped keep soil moisture up, kept it cool, and I mean, even in Adelaide, we didn't have a day over 40, which is most peculiar for an entire summer. So
yeah,
that's the good news. The bad is that poorish weather during flowering, so crops were tended to, they're always going to be smallish, a bit of disease pressure. So we, I think the vintage, the quantities of 22 are on the small side, but if you look at that Sauvignon, it's absolutely hallmark Shaw and Smith, isn't it? It's got for a wine that's not been in bottle long, it's got terrific aromatics. It's got fantastic natural acidity and length.
Yeah, it really shows up the purity that we love in Sauvignon Blanc. I should just mention the Q&A function is the one to use to ask questions. So do jump into that and ask us questions, and do share what you're drinking if you've got something open, Shaw and Smith or not. Yeah, but purity is so important with Sauvignon Blanc and everything we do, in the vineyard and the harvesting and in the winery. It's preserving that beautiful, fresh varietal character. You see, I think 22, it shows that coolness. It's really got that lovely line of acid and a little bit of that sort of gin and tonic type note to it, a real freshness.
The Riesling, which is equally only just bottled, but again, Riesling likes cool vintages too. So it's a baby, and because we release probably 80% young, and then hold back about 20% for maturation release. So we need a wine that will age well. So it's young, it's tight, but it's, you can see the aromatics, you can see the power and the length of flavour in it. It's got a lot of...
Yeah, you do get some nice white florals on the Riesling, and there's a delicacy, but there's also real intensity in it, and you can see it's got the bones to age. So that will be a cool wine to drink a bit young, but also to see it evolve over 10, 15. I mean, you can keep these wines for so long. Yeah, there's reasons. Cool. Well, we'll jump in a sec to some Chardonnays. I haven't seen any. Hopefully, I'm looking in the right place. I haven't seen any questions come up as yet, but we'll keep an eye out for that. And with Chardonnay, we're going back to 21. So after 20, which was tiny, and 20 also, we dealt with frost and hail, and we had a lot thrown at us. So 21 was a joy after all of that, and there is a balance in the M3 and a lovely easy flow, which kind of reflects the vintage. It was very balanced on the vine. We were able to pick it just when we wanted to. We didn't have any rain or any other heat affecting it, so it did get a lovely balance, and everything seems just to be in harmony.
And that, again, for a wine that's only fairly recently been released, it's really together. It's got a nice amount of struck match funk to it. Oak is there, but very subtle in the background, and just lovely power and weight.
Yeah, and I think I should mention our chief winemaker Adam Wadowitz, who some of you will have met, and either online or in person. And with Chardonnay, with all the wines, and I noticed we got Neil's drinking a 21 Pinot, which we'll look at ourselves in a moment as well. But there's always a sense that the wines like this 21 M3 are good young, but you can see they've got a lot of time to go. They're made in a way that there's promise, there's potential for it to age and to build and texture and richness over time. The acids always fresh when they're young.
Yeah, and I think that one of the hallmarks of Shaw and Smith, any of the Chardonnays, because essentially we're chilling grapes, we're whole bunch pressing, so we're getting very low levels of phenols. We're very subtle with oak. They're not overly ripe, therefore they're not excessively alcoholic, and they do age. You know, they're under screw cap, so we're not worried about cork bark. And, you know, 10 years is a walk in the park, isn't it, for them?
Easy. And it's pretty, I mean, you know, you kind of look at these wines and, gee, it's just a reminder that good Australian Chardonnay at the top end is just in such a good place. You know, there's, I think everything that we've learnt, you know, both, you know, ourselves, but also the wider community, and, you know, the ones who are really going after quality, you know, having vines that are in the right place, we've got good clones, we really have such a good feel for the fruit now. It's getting better and better.
And, you know, the points you make about vines in the right place, when you don't have to do anything, you know, when you don't have to add acid, you don't have to mess with them, it kind of, when everything is right, you know you're in the right place. And that's what Adelaide Hills, particularly the higher, cooler parts of the hills, is like for Chardonnay. You know, it all just happens as it should. So the second wine is the 2020 Lenswood Vineyard. Do you want to just explain the single vineyard concept for those who may not?
Yeah, we do, you know, really love delving into the detail, and the single vineyard wines allow us to do that and to look at a site year after year to get a really good feel for the fruit and the style that it gives, and respond to that in the winery. And you do get a bit of vintage variation, but you also get the personality of the site coming through. And you know, I think, you know, Martin, back in 2012, I think you coveted this site for some time, and then when it came up, you were ready to pounce on it.
Absolutely.
And
it's high. It's a 500 odd metres in Lenswood. It's got a myriad of different aspects, but quite a lot of east facing, so cool facing slopes. Good clonal mix. We've done an enormous amount of work, as you know, in the vineyard since we bought it. We've doubled the vine density. We've redone the trellising. You know, there's not much we haven't done, other than in some cases we've changed clones, but it's a terrific site. And, you know, both the Chardonnay and the Pinots that are coming off there are exciting, aren't they?
Yeah, and it's, you know, you imagine standing in the vineyard, you know, at 8 in the morning, and you've got the sun, the morning sun, warming up the soil on those east-facing slopes, and then at, you know, 5 o'clock at night in summer, those same slopes are not getting exposed to the heat. You know, it really does have a big impact, and you see that in the fineness and the acid line, and just the, you know, the piercing intensity in that Lenswood Chardonnay.
So in addition to being from a single site, whereas M3 is from about 4 different sites, being Lenswood, Loberthal and Piccadilly, this is single site. Winemaking wise, not major differences, other than the fact that the Lenswood is aged entirely in larger format oak, so puncheons and demi-muise. So, you know, we're looking for less surface area, and released a year later, and very small quantities, but quite a bit more expensive.
Yep. Got a question about what our current releases from Benjamin. What are we enjoying the most at the moment? Yeah, I mean, I'm enjoying that 21 M3. It's, you know, it's fairly recently released, and it's just fascinating to see that vintage in the Chardonnay. It's, you know, as I mentioned, it's a wine that's got a long career ahead of it, but there's so many interesting things going on now. the other thing that's fascinating at the moment is we're coming to the end of our 20 Shiraz, and we've been doing we did some tastings for some restaurant buyers around the place back in May, and it was just so interesting to look at the Shaw & Smith 20 Shiraz, which we're going to taste in a minute, and that wine has this incredible like raspberry coulis, sort of concentrated raspberry character, and that's fascinating as well. So I mean, I do kind of you have moments where you're really into something, but a lot of it depends on the food. I mean, you were drinking Riesling with some Thai the other night. It's pretty hard to beat.
Exactly. Also, we did a dinner last week in Adelaide for Wine Club members, and we showed these two wines side by side, and it was fascinating because probably half the room preferred the younger 21 M3 and half preferred the slightly older, slightly more complex Lenswood. I think that there wasn't a winner. They were both equally revered.
Indeed. Cool. Okay, so the next one up for us is Pinot, which we'll do on its own, and then we'll get into some Shiraz. And Pinot has been it's been pretty interesting because Pinot got knocked around more than pretty much anything in 2020. We got a tiny bit of fruit, but we lost pretty much everything from our Lenswood vineyard in 2020. So 21 is very welcome. We've had a bit of a Pinot drought, and as I mentioned, everything kind of worked in 21, and the Pinot's no exception.
Look, the Pinot project, as a project, has just been evolving like that. I think for me, the quality of the Pinots have been on a really steep curve, and but the 21s are gorgeous. The colour, the aromatics, but also the structure. There's a number of pretty sort of Pinots about the place, but they really lack. So many of them lack structure and tannin and balance and the ability to age well. And I think this wine's got all of those things in spades.
Yeah, I mean, that's a real focus for us. And I think, it's something that Pinot in the New World hasn't, the perfume is really important. And, but, it's not that hard to get the perfume. You can get the perfume. It's getting the density and the structure and having a wine that's really got a beginning, a middle, and an end, and that's where we're getting to with Pinot. And some of the things we do for that, I mean, one is we use some whole bunches, but not too many in the ferment. So it's a mix of grapes that have been destemmed but not crushed, so they're like whole berries, and they go to the vat. They don't get pumped through any hoses. They go to the fermenting vat, either up on a conveyor belt or tipped in. And then you've got some whole bunches that include the stems, and they're in there. And the stems have got tannin in them as well, so they're contributing to the structure. But also, we tend to do quite a long, gentle ferment. So you've got about 3 weeks with the juice and the skins and the stems together, extracting all the flavour and the structure.
Yeah, just back to the structural thing, I think it's interesting for those of you who have drunk much Burgundy. The Burgundians, they don't say they make Pinot, they say they make Burgundy, and they prize structure and the ability to age way more than aromatics or the sort of superficial characters of Pinot. And I think that if you look at some of those, particularly Grand Crus and the great wines, they have terrific structure, and as you know, they will age for 20, 30, 50 years.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. I'll never forget going to one of a Burgundy house called Roumier, which is one of the cult Burgundy houses in Moray Saint Denis. And he said, we're tasting a wine. He said, "Oh, it's too fruity." And at that time, I'm like, "Gee, we kind of search out fruit and flavour and vibrancy, but he was much more concerned with structure, and so there is a lesson there that we love having beautiful perfume, and you get this sort of red fruit and florals and violets and lots of that sort of thing, but then it's the silkiness of the palate, and then this firmness which gives it some structure.
And I think that's one of the real objectives that we're hoping from the Piccadilly vineyard by having. Let me just put it in perspective. The vines at Piccadilly, we're probably looking at about 5 to 6 bunches per vine, whereas in a normal, even higher density vineyard, you're probably looking at 20 or 25 bunches per vine. So that vine is putting all its resources into ripening half a dozen bunches. So you are going to get more tannin, you're going to get better acid, you're going to get more balanced fruit. And I think that that's going to be the exciting bit, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Pinot, it's a wine that we've been working on for a long time, and it is a slow burn. It takes time to really get to this point, which is exciting. But we've been working on it for coming up to a couple of decades, and you're just really starting to get the rewards from it.
I think the other thing is that you're probably all aware of the Tolpuddle vineyard, and I think that having the experience both growing grapes and making wine from that part of the world has helped us make Shaw and Smith Pinots and Chardonnays that much better.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Pretty nice wine, that 21, I reckon. So hope you're enjoying it, Neil.
And we'll get into some Shirazes. So we've got 3 we're going to look at here, which are the 2020 Shaw and Smith Adelaide Hills, the 19 Valhalla Vineyard, and then we've cracked open a 14 because I know people like to see how things are travelling in the cellars. So something with a little bit more bottle age, just to visit that. And we do re-release these wines. We hold a little bit back in the cellar and re-release them. And we'll be doing that with this 14. You can actually buy these 3 Shirazes in a wooden case. A nice little gift potentially for someone very lucky. Shiraz, it really does work well in the hills. And before I joined Shaw and Smith, I judged the Adelaide Hills Wine Show a few times, and I remember thinking, going up to the hills, there's a lot of Pinot Noir, there's a lot of Sauvignon Blanc. There'll probably be a couple of the stronger flights in the wine show. But I realised pretty quickly that Chardonnay, was pretty amazing in the hills, and Shiraz as well. There are some good Pinots and there are some good Sauvignon Blancs, but there's a bigger weight of good quality in Chardonnay and Shiraz. And it wasn't something with Shiraz originally that Martin and Michael thought was going to work.
No, look, it's not often I like to be proved wrong, but I'm very happy to admit defeat on this one. That in my early, as a young winemaker in the hills, I thought this is, it's too cold. It's not the right place for Shiraz. But the fact is that there are a number of different site climates and microclimates around the hills, and it wasn't until we actually made some wines here in 2020, the first year the winery was built, Shiraz from further south at Macclesfield, that we realised just how exciting the variety could be. And we saw those peppers spice character that you see, out of some of the Northern Rhone wines, and they're completely different from the Shiraz you would see from McLaren Vale, Barossa, or other warmer regions. But as a style, they had real credibility. So we jumped on the bandwagon, and
so that was '02, was it? Yeah, 20 years ago.
that was 2000. Sorry,
2000,
and we made the first Shiraz in '02.
Yeah.
So 20 years later, we're starting to get our act together.
Yeah, and I think that this style of Shiraz that's really vibrant, and it has this great freshness. It has spice. It's got a really the wines that are not thick and heavy. They have a real liveliness to them.
Yeah, I think two comments from me about Shiraz. One is that in the hills, because it is slightly marginal to grow Shiraz, you can't treat it as you would in a warmer climate. So you need to have low crops. You need to have good bunch exposure. We would aim for about 6 or 7 tonnes to the hectare with high density, and that's point one. Point two is, I think our Shirazes were good, and then in 13, when Adam Hodowitz came on board for his first vintage, and for those of you who don't know, Adam had come from Great Western. He'd been winemaker at Seppelt's Great Western, and prior to that, Best's Great Western. He'd won the Jimmy Watson for his Shiraz at Best's in 11. So he was really into cool climate Shiraz, and I think when he came on board, we made a number of significant investments, and the styles changed a bit, and I think the Shirazes now are super exciting.
Yeah, and I mentioned the use of whole bunches in the Pinot. That's also a factor in the Shiraz, and it's there to an extent in the Sean Smith 2020 with the red cap. But in the Balhana vineyard, he really kind of gets into that whole bunch to a bigger degree, and it makes the wine more complex, more savoury. It kind of takes a bit longer to unfurl in the glass, but also repay cellaring. It's kind of like a very distinctive personality.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, the Balhana Vineyard Shiraz comes from a north-facing slope directly behind the winery. It's quite red dirt with a lot of ironstone, and this is planted at about 5,500 vines per hectare, so pretty tight, and tends to have about 70% whole bunch. So that's a fair bit, but it doesn't show through. And it's also aged all in larger format oak. So, we don't much like oak in Shiraz, do we? We certainly don't like it to stand out.
Yeah, so not too much new oak.
We use very little new oak, maybe 20% max.
Yeah.
And so the Balhanas are really gaining a head of steam, aren't they, in terms of momentum out there?
Yeah, I think people are starting to see that style and really embrace it, and it is a wine that it's quite different. It's not so fruit based. It's more about savoury, earthy, spice, complexity, and a lot of tannin as well. So it's a bit of a Barolo lovers Shiraz, if you like. It's got this great back palate presence, which is pretty cool.
And 21 Sean Smith is coming out when?
It is about 2 months away.
Okay.
So it'll be October.
Yeah, I love that 20. I think it's really starting to get some layers.
Yeah, no, it's in a good place. So there's a real fruit purity to it, and quite perfumed, and
So talk to me about the older wine, that's 14.
Yeah, well, 14 was, it's another cool year. There was a bit of heat in early Feb, and then 14 was the Valentine's Day rain, where it was 100 plus mils of rain on Valentine's Day evening.
February 14, yeah.
February 14, and we weren't all that happy about it. I can remember coming in after that, and we're all pretty concerned, and with good reason, because Pinot, and it depends very much on where the grape is at in its ripening, but we lost pretty much all the Pinot, and that was traumatic. But Shiraz was, not as advanced as Pinot, and it was okay. And then we had about 6 weeks of the most beautiful, mild, dry, light winds, drying it out. And it turned out to be, a really lovely vintage for Shiraz. And I think sometimes when you're making wine in a cool climate and you get a cool vintage, a cool season in a cool climate, it really accentuates the points of difference of what you're doing with those wines. And so that for me makes the 14 Shiraz a really interesting one.
I suppose the difference, you're looking here at a wine that is 8 years old, so it's just starting to develop some nice tertiary characters. But also in 14, we weren't as developed in our thinking with whole bunch inclusion, larger format oak. It was still all in open fermenters, but it was. So I wouldn't think that there are as many layers of complexity in the wines that we were making in 14 versus today.
No, that's true, but it's in a nice place. It's at a nice point of evolution.
Yeah. And if you're in a restaurant or at home and you were able to buy a museum or maturation release that has been stored in our cellars, it's pretty good.
Which is an important thing. And let's see, we have an age release sticker here, and so this has been kept in the right conditions. It's been tasted, and just to see that you're really seeing that bottle age complexity coming through, because there's no point in holding onto it for 5 or 6 years and it hasn't really shown that complexity. So it's you can buy it with confidence that it hasn't been sitting in a warm place, in the window or something like that for 5 years. So that's what we like to do with us.
Are there any more questions from anybody? We've kind of tasted through the wines. It would be interesting to hear some feedback from you or questions about anything you might like.
Yeah, it's certainly nice to see that journey with the Shiraz, because it's been, I think the journey with Australian Shiraz in cool climates, it's been pretty interesting over the last decade, I think, and there's always been cool climate Shiraz, great Westerns, those best vines planted in the 1860s or so,
Exactly.
There's a long history, but I think
Valley.
Yeah, but it's probably evolved, I think, in all of our minds in the last decade, and a few regions like the Hills, the Yarra Valley, Canberra district have kind of pushed forward and given this prominence to more perfumed and elegant cool climate Shiraz. Adam's wondering how the 2020 Riesling is looking, and the selling potential of our Riesling. 2020, well, we only got a very small amount of Riesling in 20.
A third of what we were wanting, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was really small, but we were happy with it, and it was a good. 2020 had low yields, and then it had a very cool February. And so, there was good intensity of flavour, and it was, that sort of cool season, fresh acid. These wines, part of it is what your own preferences are, but you've got no problem at all with aging that Riesling for 10 or 15 years.
Exactly.
And starting to see some of those peel characters, and
yeah, I was going to say I haven't tasted the 20 for a little while, but it would be just starting to move out of that young, fresh primary fruit into a quieter period, and it won't have developed any tertiary characters yet. So,
but the acid will just soften a little bit and just get a little bit more, the allegory of kind of, the edges are being sanded off a little bit and smoothed out, those wines, they move slowly. Those Rieslings. Yeah.
So David, maybe just a couple of words from you. I'll make the introduction, but I'd like to hear from you. I think from Michael and my perspective, one of the challenges over the last decade, I suppose, has been to say, well, what does the next generation of Shaw and Smith custodians look like? And so we've worked hard putting together a team of great people, and it started with David Grant Lovelock, Adam Wadowitz. They're all part of the executive committee, and now very much the future of the management side of Shaw and Smith. But maybe just a few words about some of the people that you're putting together in your team to keep us young and exciting and relevant.
Yeah, I mean, on the sales and marketing side, we've got an embarrassment of talent, really. We've got a few ex-sommeliers which have added a lot of great wine lovers, but also a lot of experience talking to people about wine and very connected with restaurants and consumers. So in Melbourne, Tom Donegan, who came to us from Voyager Estate, but back in the day, Tom worked at Stokehouse and Coda, and some of the great restaurants in Melbourne, and a really great food and wine guy. He also spent some time in the States, so he's seen that market and lived in LA and had a pretty good time over there. Kavita Fayella was also a sommelier who worked in the UK and Asia, and ended up being group wine buyer for the Aman resorts. So a very good luxury person.
An imposing, forceful lady, isn't she? She's got a very good wine knowledge, and to be taken seriously.
Absolutely. And Penny Grant in Brisbane also comes from a somm background. She was group sommelier for the Garnham group that have Donna Chang and Blackbird and a number of restaurants, and again, a lot of talent. And so it's pretty cool to see people come in and be really smart and curious and challenging, and bringing a lot of energy to the place. And on the production side, of course, Matt Large, who is about to fly off to Italy, as he does every year, to make wine in Piedmont, again has this kind of blend of youth and experience, which is adding a lot.
And a little bit of a couple of members of the next generation from Shaw and Smith family coming on board to give you a hard time.
Indeed, yep. We've got Ella Shaw has been with us for nearly 3 years now, and Ella's taking a brief break while she looks after young Henry. But she's been experience in the UK, quite a bit of experience in Melbourne, both and distribution and also production. So Ella's added a lot to the team, and we've got Tildy Hillsmith coming on board later this year. So
who's been in the UK doing work. So
Yeah.
just as a matter of interest, we do set a pretty high bar for family members. So they really need to spend 5 years out working for other people, and then they have to go through a pretty rigorous immersion program in-house for 12 months, so that they, by the time we actually offer them a proper job, they're pretty well versed in all things Shaw and Smith, Tolpuddle, and other.
Yeah. So the second generation is here, and the third generation is, just arrived. And
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Martin's relishing being a grandfather.
I'm a grandfather. Yes, a 4-week-old grandfather. So, well, I think our time is up, is it not?
It is. Yeah. There was a question about temperature for cellaring. It's interesting. We actually keep wine at 3 different temperatures here, and I'm a bit of a stickler for temperature of serving, because you do need to be, to get the most out of it. There's nothing worse than having the wrong temperature. And one of the traps is serving Chardonnay too cold. So whilst Sauvignon and Riesling is fine straight out of the cold fridge, at 3 or 4 degrees starting off, that's fine. But for Chardonnay and more complex and textural whites, you want, we have a fridge at about 10 degrees here. And if you serve it at 10 and it can just warm up in the glass a few degrees, then that's a nice place for Chardonnay. And then the reds, we recommend serving in that sort of 16 to 18 degree mark, and it can warm up 2 or 3 degrees in the glass. But you don't want to serve it at 22 in a warm room and have it warm up from there. That is not ideal for the reds.
Yeah, I think for me, as a general observation, the better the wine, the cooler you can, not the cooler, the warmer you can serve it. So I think a great Chardonnay, great white Burgundy, cellar temperature is about spot on. But if you're drinking something pretty pedestrian, the colder the better.
And cellar temperature, 13, 14, tends to be around the mark.
Excellent. Well, I think our time is up. Thank you all for joining us.
Yep, thank you. Thanks, Martin. Thanks. Good to we don't get to see you, but good to talk to you and talk about some of the new wines and what's going on. And we'll hopefully see you in person again soon. So
and don't be shy with the feedback. It'd be good to know if we were ordinary, terrible, or okay,
or exceptional.
Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you.